Has someone ever taken credit for your work in the family?
My cousin Ryan dented my brand new motorcycle and then laughed like it was a punchline he had been saving for months, and when I stared at him waiting for an apology that never came, he shrugged and said that line I will never forget. The one people use when they want immunity without responsibility, that family does not sue family, which sounded less like love and more like a cheap insurance policy he wrote for himself, and I remember thinking that I had just met the grown-up version of the kid who broke your stuff and then hid behind his mother's legs while you got told to be nice. The bike mattered because it was the first thing I had bought for myself after years of being the practical one who saved receipts and paid copays and made peace in group chats. A promise to myself that I could have something I actually wanted without asking permission. And I had babied it through early rides and careful parking and those nervous first weeks when you treat a purchase like a new passport into a part of your life you kept postponing. So when I walked out and saw the dent along the tank with that ugly crease that looks small to everyone else until it is yours, my stomach dropped in that slow, heavy way that tells you a fight is coming whether you like it or not. Ryan was there with a beer in his hand and a story already formed, saying he had only moved it a little because it was in the way, saying he tapped it with his hip, saying it must have been already like that, saying a lot of things that piled up into a mound of nothing, and then he laughed in that confident way people do when they know the room will hold them up no matter how badly they are behaving. And sure enough, our aunt chimed in with that sing-song tone that belongs in a preschool, that boys will be boys and it is just a dent and no one got hurt, and my mother tried to smooth it over with a smile that always makes me feel like a scolded child, reminding me that Ryan has been under stress and that I should not make a scene because we only get so many family weekends. I wanted to say a lot of things, not one of them polite, but I also knew how that script ends, with me cast as the overreacting woman who cares too much about a thing and not enough about harmony, so I swallowed it and asked one calm question: whether he was going to pay for the repair, and he grinned in that slow way that tells you the decision has already been made without you, and he said that famous line again, that family does not sue family, and the circle around him laughed like it was wisdom, which told me everything I needed to know about how the day would go if I pushed. Here is the part one will admit only to you over coffee because it still makes me angry at myself. For a few minutes I tried to rationalize it the way they wanted me to, telling myself it was only money, that a dent is not a tragedy, that I could fix it and move on, and the more I tried to be reasonable the more I felt myself disappearing, because the point was not the metal. The point was the message that my boundaries did not matter if they were inconvenient for the group. And I could feel that old habit waking up in me, the one where I fix everything by absorbing the cost and smiling through it. But the thing about getting older is that you stop mistaking peace for silence, and while they were busy telling me to relax, I was taking a long breath and remembering that I had options that did not require their permission. So I took photos from every angle and sent a quick message to the dealer to ask for an estimate, and I opened the insurance app to start a claim without hitting submit, because I wanted a file number waiting in drafts like a spare key in my pocket. And I did it while standing there in the driveway with Ryan, still holding court, because if they were going to turn this into a performance, then I could learn to play my part without explaining every move. He kept talking, getting a little louder as people laughed, saying he did me a favor because the bike was too precious the way I treated it, saying I needed to loosen up, and I felt this calm slide over me. Not the fragile kind that cracks when someone raises their voice, but the steady kind that shows up when you finally decide you're done being the soft landing for other people's bad choices. I told him I heard him. I told him I was not going to argue. And I watched him mistake my quiet for surrender, which is a common mistake in my family and one I have learned to let people make because it keeps them careless. By late afternoon, the group moved inside for food and the story kept getting retold with new details that made him look cooler and me look uptight, and I sat there listening and thinking about all the times this exact dynamic played out with different props. A broken chair here, a lost deposit there, a borrowed car returned with an empty tank and a new scratch, and every time the same line about family and forgiveness, like an old song they never get tired of, and I realized I was not angry about a dent. I was angry about a pattern, the kind that keeps going because it works for the people who benefit from it. So I took a small step that no one noticed, and that felt like a quiet kind of revenge, the kind that does not need witnesses to matter, and I booked a service appointment under a category the dealer advised me to use when the damage is caused by a known person. Not an accident, which changes how the paperwork looks when it eventually reaches the eyes that count, and then I texted Ryan a simple message that I needed his full legal name and current address for warranty documentation, which he sent without thinking because arrogance makes people helpful in the strangest ways, and I saved that too. I wish I could say I stood up and delivered a speech that fixed the moral compass of everyone in that room, but that is not how real life works, and it would not have landed anyway, so I did what actually works for me. I stopped arguing with people who enjoy the argument more than the truth. I gathered what I needed, and I kept my mouth shut, which is harder than it sounds when your pride is screaming, but it paid off. Because in the silence I started to remember something I had not thought about since the moment it happened. Something tucked away in my phone that did not care about opinions or laughter or family slogans. Something that could not be talked over or softened or explained away, and the second the memory clicked into place I felt a slow, steady smile start somewhere deep and stubborn. I did not say a word to anyone. I finished my plate, I hugged people goodbye, and I drove home with that thought growing clearer by the minute, because there is a difference between keeping the peace and setting the stage, and I knew which one I was doing now. Since my phone had been right there the entire time that day, open for something else, capturing more than I realized, and if what I remembered was actually on that file, then the next time he tried that line about family, I was going to let someone else do the talking while I simply hit play. By the next weekend, I was already being told to let it go, and because I know how my people operate when a story threatens the comfort of the group, I showed up to the cookout with a smile that said I was not here to fight, but I was also not here to be drafted into their version of events, which meant I brought potato salad and patience and kept my hands busy, so I would not say something I could not take back. And within 15 minutes the day turned into the kind of performance they live for, with Ryan retelling the dent like it was a comedy bit that put him in the role of harmless rascal and me in the role of fussy hall monitor, who needed to unclench and learn about priorities. They laughed in that easy way people do when they have never paid the bill for someone else's mess. They took little jabs about how I treat purchases like sacred relics. They tossed around phrases about family bonding and how things can be fixed and how this is exactly why holidays get tense. And I watched their faces the way you watch a slow game of cards where most players are more interested in entertaining each other than in what is actually on the table, and I kept thinking how much simpler life becomes when you realize you do not need to win a room that never gives you a fair hand. Ryan was in his element, pausing for effect, adding a detail about how I supposedly parked like I owned the block, pinching his fingers to show how small the dent was, making eye contact with my mother so she could offer the line about how I work hard and get wound tight and could use a little loosening. And I did that thing I have learned to do when everyone believes the wrong person is the problem. I nodded, I let him talk. And I let their laughter wear itself out, because nothing makes entitlement step on its own shoelaces like silence that does not flinch. Inside, between refills and paper plates, a few of the cousins tried the friendly approach, the little guilt taps that sound like concern, asking if I was really going to involve insurance over something so small and whether I truly wanted to make it awkward for the older folks who hate conflict, and because I am tired of pretending I do not understand the rules. I smiled and said I had not decided anything yet, which was true in the literal sense and untrue in the way that counts, because what I had decided was that I would not be negotiating in a kitchen where the terms were respect for them and humiliation for me, which meant I needed to move the conversation to a place with rules they could not rewrite. So I took a breath, stepped onto the porch where the signal was better, and sent a clean, neutral request through the payment app with a note that said, "Repair deposit for the motorcycle dent acknowledged by Ryan." And I addressed it to him directly instead of posting another paragraph into the family chat where context goes to die. I did not expect him to pay on the spot. I expected him to make a joke and decline, and that was fine. Because the point was not a surprise windfall, the point was a timestamped record that would look excellent next to the photos and the estimate, and the moment his refusal came in with a laughing comment about not funding my hobbies, I screenshotted the whole thing and uploaded it to my claim draft, which gave me a quiet kind of satisfaction that did not require an audience. Back inside, they were still looping the same lines when my aunt asked me to say something to ease the tension, which is a special kind of irony only families can pull off, asking the person being mocked to make everyone else comfortable. And I said I was fine and that I preferred to handle things directly, and I let the sentence hang long enough for Ryan to wander over and turn it into another bit, telling everyone I had finally learned the magic phrase, and then he said a louder version of the thing he loves, that family does not sue family, and I said nothing while my brain quietly replayed the end of the afternoon when the dent happened and a memory clicked into place hard enough to make my grip tighten around the plastic cup. Here is the part one had forgotten because the day was chaotic and I was angry and I was not looking for it, but it came back then with perfect clarity that made my heart pound in that steady drumbeat that announces a plan. Which is that earlier on the day of the dent I had been recording video messages to send to a friend who was helping me decide between small custom decals, and I never closed the camera app when I set the phone on the seat to grab the garage keys, which means the mic kept listening while I walked inside, which means that when Ryan wandered over to show off and moved the bike and hit the tank and then laughed, the phone was not asleep, it was awake and deaf to everyone's opinions. And if that audio was clean enough to hear what I think it captured, then the phrase about family was about to meet the sound of his own voice. I am not proud of what came next, but I am not sorry either, because sometimes the only way to break a script is to write a new one in front of the same cast. So when the teasing hit another high note, I looked at Ryan and said that I appreciated the advice, and I would remember it when I spoke with the adjuster, and when he puffed up and told me I would look ridiculous calling professionals for a family matter, I let out a small, real laugh that I could not stop, which made him ask what was so funny, and I told him I had a great memory from the day of the dent, and I could not wait to go home and check whether it sounded as clear out loud as it did in my head. And I watched the very first flicker of uncertainty cross his face like a passing shadow no one else noticed, and I knew I had finally put a crack in the confidence he wore like armor. People kept eating and talking while I sat with that quiet buzz of possibility, and I did one more tiny thing that felt petty and perfect. I texted the group chat a polite thank you for the afternoon and attached a cropped picture of the dent with the estimate line that read preliminary, not final, which was boring to anyone who did not know how paperwork works, but very interesting to anyone who has ever had a claim escalate once new information surfaces, and then I put my phone away and said my goodbyes, because I wanted him to spend the evening pretending he was fine while a small voice asked him what exactly I might have. I drove home without music and went straight to the kitchen counter where I leave my keys and chargers, opened the photos, scrolled past the selfies and the little clips from that morning, and found the one with the strange long waveform that should not have been there. And when I tapped it and heard the scrape and the thud, and then his voice saying my name like a joke and dropping that line about family in the kind of tone you use when you believe nothing can touch you, I stopped the playback halfway and set the phone down, because I had heard enough to know the next move would not be a text or a plea or another round of kitchen politics. It would be a room, it would be a table, it would be faces I grew up with, and it would be the sound of his own words answering the question he loved to ask. The clip was longer than I expected and messier than I hoped, which made me nervous at first, because you know how these things go when you count on technology to back you up, and then it betrays you with wind noise or someone talking over the part you need. But the more I listened, the more I realized it did not have to be courtroom perfect. It just had to be undeniable to the people who knew our voices by heart, and that was exactly what it was, a steady chain of sound that started with a scrape, landed with a dent, and rolled right into Ryan's laugh, followed by his little slogan about family and lawsuits, the whole thing wrapped up in that cocky tone he uses when he thinks he is the main character and the rest of us are here to be forgiving extras. I let the audio run twice, then set the phone face down and stood there breathing through the urge to call the entire family and blast it into their ears one by one until they finally admitted what was obvious. But if there's one lesson I have paid for over the years, it is that timing beats volume, and that when you give people a chance to retreat from a bad position without humiliating them, sometimes they surprise you, and when they do not, you get the added satisfaction of knowing you tried, which becomes useful later when they rewrite history. So I made a decision that felt steady and grown. I would not send the recording yet. I would curate the moment so there would be no room to dodge. And then I would let it speak for itself while I said very little and watched who tried to rearrange their loyalties after the truth turned the light on. Before anything else, I needed one clear opinion from someone who does not love me enough to lie and does not hate me enough to celebrate my mistakes, so I called Dana, the friend who has heard every version of my family drama and still manages to ask the question that stops me from going too far, and I told her I had an audio file that was either gold or garbage and I needed a gut check. And she came over without asking for details because she knows how I get when I am holding something that could change the temperature of an entire room, and we sat at my kitchen table like we have 100 times, and I let the clip play while I watched her face for that microsecond of recognition that tells you which way the story will go. She winced at the scrape, cursed softly at the thud, and froze at his laugh, and when the line about family came through as clear as if he were standing in the room, she hit pause herself and said, "There it is," which was enough for me. Because Dana does not do theater, and she does not hand out encouragement like gum. She only says what she would say if she were wearing your shoes and tripping in them, and she told me two things that settled me like a weight placed exactly where it belongs. First, that this audio would change the conversation from he said, she said to we all heard it, and second, that if I launched it over text it would turn into a chaos spiral of excuses and edits. But if I played it once in the same room where they had all laughed at me, it would land like a door slamming and stay that way. That image, not metaphorical, just practical, of a door closing on the old script, did something to me, because for the first time since the dent I stopped feeling like a defendant in a case I did not choose and started feeling like a person with a plan. And the plan was simple and clean. I would create a record outside the family that said I had asked for payment and been refused. I would secure the audio in places where it could not conveniently vanish if a phone went missing, and I would wait for the next gathering that put us at the same table with witnesses who had the power to apply social pressure more effectively than any text could. So I did the boring work first, which almost nobody sees, but which holds everything together. I exported the clip in its original file type and in a format any phone could read. I backed it up to cloud storage that is not shared and then to a thumb drive that lives with my passport. I emailed it to myself with a subject line so dry it would never catch an eye if someone snooped, and I wrote a brief note in a private folder with the date, the time, and what the audio captured, not because I wanted to be dramatic, but because I have learned that when the story gets loud, details keep you calm. Then I took a breath and did the part that felt small but necessary. I sent Ryan a second payment request for a larger portion of the estimate with the same neutral note about the repair deposit. And when he declined it with a winking comment about how I should treat this as a lesson in priorities, I took another screenshot and attached it to my claim draft along with a short summary of the audio that I did not upload yet. Because I am not reckless and I am not a saint, I am a woman who has been told to be reasonable one too many times and has finally decided to be precise instead. By midweek, the invitation I needed showed up on its own without me lifting a finger, which tells you everything about how predictable we are as a group. A family dinner for Ryan's birthday at Aunt Linda's place with the usual promise of jokes and speeches, and those little toasts that turn into monologues, and when the group chat lit up with exclamation points and reminders to bring sides. I typed that I would be there, and I kept the rest to myself, because surprise is not just dramatic, it is efficient, and I wanted the truth to land before anyone had a chance to raise a wall in front of it. In the days before the dinner, people tried new strategies to get me to stand down without admitting why they needed me to. One cousin asked if I could just let the professionals handle it quietly since public scenes make the older generation uncomfortable. Someone else suggested we make it a learning moment about boundaries without pointing fingers. My mother offered the longest version of "Please do not embarrass us" that I have ever heard, and I listened. I agreed that peace matters, and I said I wanted exactly that, which was true in my own definition because real peace does not require me to swallow a lie. It requires the lie to stop asking for dessert at my table. I spent that last afternoon doing something that might sound petty if you have not lived in my shoes. I rehearsed saying almost nothing. Because when people come for your character, they expect a speech, and when you do not give them one, they have to deal with the evidence instead. So I practiced the shortest setup line I could say without sounding smug. I checked the volume levels on my phone because I did not want fumbling to give anyone a lifeline, and I set a reminder to record the dinner. Audio on my watch, not to trap anyone, just to keep a record in case this all spun into another story later where I supposedly screamed or threw a plate or flipped a table, since in my family female anger is always larger on review than in real time. By the time I pulled into Aunt Linda's driveway, I felt something I had not felt since this started, a kind of stillness that comes when you stop begging for fairness and start creating conditions where it cannot be ignored. And even if the night ended with them still choosing him over me, I knew I would not be leaving with my dignity in their hands. And when the story started, when the teasing warmed up, when Ryan lifted his glass and delivered his favorite line about what families do and do not do, I did not interrupt. I waited for the exact beat where people lean in for the laugh, and I reached for my phone with steady hands, because for once I was not going to argue for my reality, I was going to press play on his. I walked into Aunt Linda's place determined not to play the role I always get handed at these gatherings, the one where I smooth things over and laugh at jokes that punch me in the face, and instead I decided to let the night unfold while I kept a steady course. Because I did not need to fight to win, I just needed everyone to hear what they had not heard yet, and for that I needed patience, timing, and the small discipline to resist every baited hook Ryan would dangle as he warmed up the room. Dinner at our family events has a rhythm that repeats no matter the season. People orbit the kitchen. The first round of stories schemes old victories and harmless gossip. The second round edges into teasing. And the third round gets mean if nobody checks the temperature, so I took my spot near the end of the table where I could see faces and reach my bag without making a scene. And I let Ryan tell his opener about a work call that went sideways because a manager would not own a mistake, which earned him a wave of sympathetic noises that he loves because it gives him a runway to take off into his favorite subject, which unfortunately is always himself. I notice my mother watching me the way she does when she wants to head off an explosion before a spark exists, and because I was not trying to burn anything down, I gave her a small nod that said I was calm and meant it. Then I poured water, passed dishes, and stayed present without inserting myself into anything, which is harder than it sounds when you are used to defending yourself before the accusation arrives. And when the teasing finally pivoted to the motorcycle, I did nothing more than look up and meet eyes without flinching, which changed the energy just enough to make a few people sit straighter, as if they could sense that this time the script might not go the way they memorized it. Ryan could not help himself. He launched into the Dent story with a swagger that had been rehearsed across several kitchens and patios by now, and he embellished with the usual props, my alleged perfectionism, his alleged helpfulness, the supposed size of the dent that shrinks every time he describes it, and he took a sip and delivered his favorite closer about family and lawsuits with the timing of a late-night comic, and it landed the way he wanted, light laughter, a couple of claps, the head tilt of an uncle who thinks the moral is that I should get over myself, and I let the beat pass so it would register. Then I leaned forward and asked him if he would be willing to say the same thing one more time clearly for me, not because I needed to hear it again, but because I wanted it on the air in the room right before the truth stepped in. He grinned, pleased with himself, and asked if I planned to frame it, so I said I planned to remember it exactly as he said it, and he repeated it slower, like a teacher instructing a tired class, and he added that real families handle things privately, which he said with a glance at my mother, because he has always loved recruiting authority for his side, and I said that I agreed, that this family prefers the private approach, and that I wanted to handle this privately right now, here, with all of us, so that no one had to keep repeating the wrong version later, which made Aunt Linda perk up because she likes tidy endings, and made two cousins shift in their chairs because they smelled trouble and did not want to be seated when it arrived. I asked 3 questions calmly and without sarcasm, and each one was a small boundary stake I hammered in before the big move. Did he deny touching the motorcycle on the day it was dented? Did he deny laughing about the dent while I stood there? And did he deny saying out loud that family does not sue family, and to each he gave me exactly what I expected, the kind of slippery non-denial denial that sounds strong if you are not listening closely, as in he did not move it so much as adjust it. He did not laugh at me so much as at the situation, and he did not say families do not sue as a rule so much as a general principle, which earned him the approving chuckle he always chases and tightened the knot I needed him to tie for himself. Since hedging in front of witnesses is still hedging, and the contrast would be obvious when the next sound filled the room. I could feel old habits pushing at me to deliver a speech about respect and property and the way women get cast as dramatic for asking for basic fairness. A speech I have given in other rooms and regretted every time because it lets people debate tone instead of truth, so I stopped myself and did something simpler. I said I appreciated him clearing that up. I thanked everyone for listening. And I asked for 2 minutes with their attention so we could put this to bed in a way that would keep future dinners from turning into reality rewrites, and when an uncle started to groan about drama, I smiled and told him I agreed. The constant retelling was dramatic, which is why I wanted to end it now, quickly and cleanly. And then move on to birthday cake like civilized people. My mother touched my elbow and whispered if I was sure, and I told her softly that I was done arguing and that I only wanted everyone to hear something that already happened. No commentary, no accusations, just sound. And I could see in her eyes that old fear that I would embarrass us, but I also saw something else, maybe fatigue, maybe curiosity, maybe a faint hope that I would finally handle it without tipping the table. And that was enough to keep me steady as I reached into my bag and placed the phone on the table with the kind of care you use for fragile things that should never have needed protecting in the first place. Ryan tried one last move. He cracked a joke about me bringing a presentation to dinner, and he got a couple of laughs, but not as many as before, because the room felt different now, quieter around the edges. And I let him have that last chuckle because taking it away would give him a grievance, and I do not feed grievances when I am about to serve facts. I unlocked the phone, turned the volume to a level everyone could hear without straining, and said one sentence I had practiced the night before, that I was going to play a short clip from the day of the dent, and then I would shut up and we could all decide how to handle the repair after hearing it, and I looked at Ryan as I said it, not to intimidate him, but to give him the courtesy of knowing exactly what was about to happen. He opened his mouth to object and then seemed to think better of it, maybe because the word private was still hanging in the air like a promise I had made to the whole table, maybe because he believed I was bluffing and wanted to call it, and either way it did not matter. Because I was done asking for permission from the person who broke my stuff and wrote his own absolution on it, so I steadied my hand, let the silent beat stretch long enough for people to lean in, and with every face turned toward the center of the table and every excuse stripped of oxygen, I tapped the screen and pressed play. The first sound out of the phone was that small mechanical scrape that means nothing to strangers and everything to the person who owns the thing that got hurt, followed by the dull thud that made a few faces flinch even if they tried to pretend they did not. And then came Ryan's laugh, not nervous or confused, but bright and smug the way only people get when they think the room belongs to them. And after the laugh came his voice saying my name like a joke and dropping the line that had been repeated all week as if it were scripture, that family does not sue family, and I watched the room listen the way a room listens when there is nothing left to interpret, because whatever they wanted to believe about tone or intentions or my supposed sensitivity, a phone does not pick sides, it just repeats what happened. I let the audio run to the end where I asked if he was going to pay, and he said no with that lazy certainty entitlement gives you, and then I tapped stop and set the phone down without looking at it like it was a mic I had finished with. And the silence that followed was not the dramatic kind you hear in movies, it was the everyday kind that shows up in kitchens when someone realizes they are not going to be able to lie their way out of a simple truth, and people reacted in those small human ways that tell you everything. The poker cousin adjusted his glasses even though he was not reading. An aunt reached for a napkin she did not need. My mother looked at the table as if counting the pattern and the wood might give her a way to rewind the last minute. And Ryan tried to laugh again, but the sound landed wrong, like a door closing on his foot. He went for the only move he had left, which was to argue context, insisting that he had been kidding and that the sound was not what it seemed and that the dent existed before and that the clip did not show the bike, so who could say? And as he talked faster, I let him fill the air while I kept my voice steady and low, because the trick with people who need volume to win is that you do not raise yours to meet theirs. You lower it until everyone else has to lean in if they want to hear you, and when the talking finally ran out of room, I said that what we had all just heard was enough for me, and that I was done with the debate phase, and that I had already documented the estimate, the refusals, and the admission, and that I would be filing the claim in the morning with the audio attached, which is when Aunt Linda, who hates scenes more than she hates injustice, asked if there was a way to handle this right here without involving outsiders. I said yes. There was an easy way and a dignified way, and it required exactly one thing, which was for Ryan to transfer the repair cost by tonight with a short note stating that the payment was for the dent he caused, and that if that happened, I would mark the claim as resolved and everyone could keep their private philosophy about what families do or do not do, and I said it plainly without heat because I wanted to make the bridge visible in case anyone wanted to walk across it. And for a second, I saw a few faces tilt toward that option. Not because they love fairness, but because they love closure, and closure was sitting on the table with a price tag that was cheaper than the story they were about to live if he refused. He said some nonsense about principle and precedent, and how paying would be admitting fault when the clip did not show his hands, and that is what finally moved the ground under us. Because a couple of relatives who had been quiet suddenly had to decide whether their loyalty was to the story that protected him or to the peace they keep saying they want, and my uncle, who has never defended me in his life, cleared his throat and said there was nothing ambiguous about what we had all heard, while another cousin asked Ryan why he was willing to spend his birthday arguing instead of fixing a mistake that he had bragged about 5 minutes earlier, and with every measured push from them I said less. Because there is a difference between winning an argument and letting a truth change the room, and I wanted the room to do the work for me. When he realized the tide had shifted, he turned to my mother, tried to recruit her with a wounded look, and she did the smallest brave thing I have ever seen her do. She did not save him. She just said my name gently and asked me what I needed to feel done. And I told her the same thing I had told the table, that payment with a note tonight would close it, and that failure to do that would send it to insurance and, if necessary, to the simple process where people sign statements under oath. Which I did not say as a threat but as a schedule, because I am too old to live in circles, and she nodded, and for once the favor asked of the family was not that I swallow a lie, it was that he take responsibility like an adult. He tried to negotiate the number down and I shook my head. He tried to split it into installments and I shook my head again. And when he muttered that this was a shakedown, I smiled in a way that was not sweet and told him that a shakedown requires force, whereas this was simply a bill plus proof. And then I looked at my watch and said that I would give him until the end of dessert so that nobody could say I ruined the celebration, which made a few people laugh with relief because I had handed them a path that looked polite even though it was lined with steel, and we sang the song, we cut the cake, and I sipped coffee while my phone stayed face down beside my plate because I did not need to hover. I just needed to keep the boundary visible like a painted line you can step over if you want to pay the ticket later. He did not pay during dessert, and honestly I did not expect him to, because men like Ryan do not pivot under pressure unless the cost of standing still becomes greater than the cost of moving. So when the plates were cleared and the table scattered, I said my goodbyes with the same courtesy I used when I arrived. I thanked Aunt Linda for dinner, I kissed my mother's cheek, and I left without a speech, without a victory dance, without a single look back to check if anyone was chasing me. Because the decision was in his hands and the evidence was in mine, and I had no more energy to donate to a performance that was already closing. The next morning I filed the claim with the audio attached and the screenshots arranged in tidy order, and I copied a version of the file to a folder named with a dry label that would bore even the nosiest relative. And I sent one last message to Ryan with the claim number and a note that said I would withdraw it upon receipt of full payment that day, and when he answered with a paragraph about betrayal and family values and my cold heart, I forwarded the thread to the adjuster and went to work. Because sometimes the most satisfying revenge is not a slam or a clapback, but a calendar of small, unarguable actions that move forward whether or not anyone approves. 2 days later, the payment arrived in one clean transfer with a curt note that said for repair, which I screenshotted and archived without replying, and that was the end of the dent, even if it was not the end of the noise. Because the group chat tried to drag me back into a debrief about how things might have been handled differently and whether my approach was harsh, and I let the notifications climb while I made dinner in my quiet kitchen. Since I had learned the only lesson I needed from this, which is that you cannot make people love accountability, you can only make it unavoidable, and when it finally becomes unavoidable, they will call it cruel even as they comply. I have not blocked anyone and I have not apologized, and I am not pretending there was no cost, because the next few gatherings will be chilly and some relationships will never go back to the easy lie we used to tell. But I can live with that because the bike is fixed. The bill was paid by the person who created it, and I did not have to scream or beg or pretend not to care to get there. I just had to stop playing the version of myself that made everyone else comfortable, and press play on the version of him that made the truth unavoidable. And here is the part that settles me when the doubt shows up late at night and asks if I went too far. I remember that before the clip existed, I was already right and it did not matter. And after the clip existed, I did not gloat or destroy or humiliate. I simply held the line and refused to trade reality for peace. And maybe that is why the best message I have received since all this ended was not the transfer notification or the claim closure. It was a text from a cousin who never takes sides, saying that the next time someone says family does not sue family, she is going to answer that real family does not force you to choose between silence and self-respect, which is not a truce and not a victory parade. But it is the kind of sentence you build a new script around, and I am fine leaving a little unfinished business on the table if it means the old one stops getting performed.